Good evening. Good evening, ladies. Oh, there we go. I do apologize if this is going to seem a little bit odd, and there's a good chance that I probably won't be doing this to anybody because I did this last minute. But this is definitely going to be a book review. I'm doing it like this because I was sick for half the weekend, and the other half of the weekend I was working out in the yard. I've kind of run out of time, so this is going to be unedited already. So you're just going to get my raw thoughts on this. I do apologize if I hurt anyone's feelings. It is not meant to be. But today we are reviewing Instruments of War by John Briggs. And I came upon this because, well, I decided to review this because it felt a little bit like Starship Troopers from what I was reading. And I decided I would pick it up and give it a read. And in a lot of ways, I'm really happy I did. And in a few ways, I'm not. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the timeline recap and get into my likes and then my dislikes and then my thoughts. This is going to follow what a normal book review for me would be like, but I'm just doing it live because I'm really running out of time and I'd like to not be up for 48 hours straight. So, we start with Captain Joaquin Lafontaine, a type of Hispanic Creole, I'm assuming, and they do call him Hispanic often in the books. He's losing a battle over the planet of Tempest. His job there is to help evacuate the VIPs and a lot of the civilians. The problem is the two fleets that were protecting him have been defeated by the aliens they were fighting. He decides to stage a kind of daring suicide maneuver that will possibly take out all the ships that are in front of them. He tells two of his ships to engage their light speed drives and everyone to abandon ship. That way they'll collide at near light speed with the ships in front of them. And strangely enough, this works. The other ships are broken to pieces and basically blasted apart. Joaquin is actually very excited about this until more ships show up from the side. This leads him to make a hasty retreat with only a quarter of the evacuees that he expected he was going to have due to space restrictions and a few other things. We rejoin him quickly, waiting for his court martial. He has quickly become a great villain as they are already having a lot of trouble with this war that they're in, and he cost them a great deal, both in people and in humiliation. During his court martial, he is basically blamed for everything, told he was taught how to think and be prepared for the unexpected. A term I've never quite understood, being prepared for the unexpected. That's only partially possible. But as government officials do, they have their scapegoat, and so they are going to beat it until it is not worth beating anymore. They sentence him to death for his innumerable failures, many of which seem like failures of the government themselves, and send him back to the prison from whence he came. Joaquin goes to bed that night thinking to himself how lucky he is that he's by himself and doesn't have to defend himself from the large and some alien prisoners that are also inhabiting the prison that want to use him as, and I quote, prison meat. However, he awakens in the middle of the night and all the lights are off. And as he proceeds to try to find the bars to his cell and call for people, he discovers that there's no more bars, but some thick glass in front of him. And he has been abducted by a shadowy government organization, which is giving him, in the largest quotes I can use possible, a chance to redeem himself by joining the mobile infantry. Basically, they're going to throw him into the meat grinder because our lucky boy, Joaquin, has just been recruited into a penal legion. It's not called a penal legion, but it's a penal legion. He meets another person, a woman named Trish, who tries to inquire about why he's there. Finds out that he is, and I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, so I'm not going to try, basically the guy who screwed up Tempest. And he's all over the news. She informs him that people were basically trying to make excuses for him, but they were drowned out by all the people who were just enraged, and all the trolls who found ways to hack into the TV program. Because news in 400 some years is just so much more fun when the trolls can actually interrupt the live news feed. Kind of wish that was something we could have here. During their trip, and as soon as they arrive at this new destination, they make friends with two more people, one who's kind of a big blonde pervert and a big black gangster who is falsely imprisoned, as so many people who were in prison will claim to have been. Nobody believes him, and it's not important if he was or not. He's there now, he's part of the program, and the people in charge make it very clear that they don't care whether he committed the crime or not. They have been conscripted into what is going to be called the Avatar Project, a truly not overused name. I'm sorry, but it is a little bit overused. But what can you do? They are going to be a new group of super soldiers that they're going to use to show the Jari, which is the aliens they're fighting against, a thing or two and teach them all sorts of crazy new things. So they start their training under Sergeant Rothschild, who in their first lesson insults the gangster till he attacks him, and then when the gangster tries to attack, beats him to the ground and breaks his arm, shipping him off to the med bay. This is one of the things that made me feel a bit more like this was Starship Troopers-esque. We have some moments of character building in the next day's breakfast. And we meet our other people, where our main character's new... Let's make this clear. Everybody has been given a new name, and they are forbidden by a shock chip that is implanted in their body they call the Master's Lash from using their old names. Our main character is now Echo 7, and his friends are Echo 4, the woman he met earlier, Echo 10, the big blonde pervert, and Echo 12, the gangster who got beat up by the sergeant. They go through several different classes over the next months, trying to learn to be better soldiers. And they end up going through some surgeries to make them new soldiers and put in all sorts of new stuff like, and quote, shields, end quote, into their bodies. This is going to come back up much later. Then we have a small, what I'm going to affectionately call the Army Prom, where our main character gets some, even though he's not supposed to, and he is promptly beat up. Howdy, Rainer. I'm just going over the timeline right now. I'm doing this like my normal book reviews, but feel free to chat and I will answer some questions. So after our little prison prom, where our main character ended up getting some and was promptly punished for doing so, they begin to resume their lessons and are to be quickly deployed. They are to be soon deployed by the army onto the battlefield. I believe it was 2 weeks earlier than expected. Sergeant Rothschild is not happy about this and says he needs more time to prepare their soon-to-be super soldiers. But the government, being the government, is like, nah, we don't care. You're going to send them out anyway. You know, I hadn't heard of this book either, Rainer, but it just kind of came up in my mentions. And it seemed a lot like Starship Troopers, so I thought, hey, we'll give it a shot. So we're come to our first deployment, and on their first mission, they are sent to capture an enemy ship. And as we could so expect from a group of people who have been barely trained and are basically part of a penal legion anyway, it's a bit of a bloodbath. Yes, they're a bit bigger and they're a bit stronger, and many of them die, including some of our named characters, including Echo 10 and the woman, our main character hooked up with. There are many indications or jokes in this book that the main character is gay, but he demonstrates fairly early on during their little army prom that he is not. All the soldiers are upset because the shields that were supposedly installed aren't working, and they're catching flack and getting shot, which is something that is rightful to be upset about. But they end up capturing their spots. They seem to be doing pretty well. And they're fighting these big spider/people aliens, able to put them down pretty quickly with their extra strength and awesome new weapons. However, despite the fact they've captured all the points, there's one point they haven't captured, and that is the self-detonation that the ship has, this being a large nuclear bomb in the center of a ship. Such a wonderful thing to have to go disarm. So our main character, Echo 7, takes a group of people with him to attempt to capture this bomb. This is where Echo 10 dies. He gets hit with a bunch of lasers and his entire head melts. And we know this because we are given graphic and gory detail about his face melting right in front of Echo 7. And Echo 7 has to use his former friend as a meat shield to prevent him from suffering the same face melting wonderfulness that befell his friend. However, somehow through it all, Echo 7 goes a little bit ballistic and just starts destroying all the enemies, eventually making it to the atomic bomb at the middle of the ship. He's gone a little bit nuts, and everybody around him is a little bit freaked out by how nuts he's being, but he's just having fun killing aliens, and honestly, with how many of them have died, they should kind of expect this. They capture the bomb and, amazingly enough, manage to defuse it, only for the person who defused it to immediately die. They are told that there are more of these aliens on their way to take care of them, so they all start lining up outside, and suddenly there's a lot more soldiers than they think there should be. In fact, they see a few that they think have probably died. And it turns out the stuff that was put in their bodies was not shields, but is a weird kind of AI system that just reanimates the dead corpses and makes them continue fighting. And this right here is where I'm going to leave off the recap because we're a little bit over 50% of the book, but I was really light on the details and I really, really wanted to get to that wonderful little touch of grim darkness because that's where the real fun of this book starts. Yes, when I got to that point, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, what right does this suddenly have to be interesting? So let's talk about what I liked because that's why I took us this far. These zombie soldiers are the thing I like most about this book because they're not quite zombie soldiers. So what was implanted in these people were a series of AI chips throughout their body, which is able to reanimate the body once it falls and allow it to continue following commands. They are programmed with all sorts of basic battle strategies. They can hold a position, they can hold off enemies, they can shoot things, and even if they start getting pulped, they will just keep going. It is mentioned later in the book that the people who created them, as they're showing a video of what one of them did, basically, it was to give you a recap of the video they showed, the alien crushed the guy's head, just the top of his head. 5 minutes later, the soldier stands back up, chases the alien down, and smiles as it proceeds to beat the alien to death, horrifying the alien. And I have to say, as far as psychological warfare goes, that would certainly stop you cold. It never mentions if it's some sort of radio waves or not. They follow audio commands, but they will also follow commands from a PDA. This is set 400 years in the future, so it doesn't go too heavy into the technology, just mentioning the bare bones. Furthermore, they have some other things with these soldiers where they have medicines that keep them from rotting. So even if they're missing their entire chest cavity or half of their internal organs, if they can drag their mangled self, and some of them actually have to drag their mangled bodies back to a medical bay, they can be rebuilt to a certain degree. This causes all kinds of ethical questions to come up, which I just love because it makes this story so dark. That it actually is brought up that they have more corpses than they know what to do with, so this is what they're deciding they're going to do. And I'm sorry if I'm giggling. I love grimdark. I love grimdark. But it does bring up some other problems in this story. Mainly that some of these soldiers had gotten close to the ones they had been in with training, and they're now seeing their reanimated corpses basically walking around and fighting. And it causes all kinds of PTSD and trauma for other soldiers, especially people who have to take command, because now they've got the groups who have been traumatized and the corpses of the fallen who just basically do whatever they're told and are actually remarkably capable. They can do things like take a position, set explosives, wait for orders from a distance. It's creepy and crazy and absolutely wonderful. Furthermore, I really like the fact that this book really covers the necessities of war because this is a war we are losing and losing hard. So it basically allows some really awful innovations to come about. And I mean really awful innovations. There are parts later in the book where some of the main characters who live literally lose body parts, very vital body parts, and the field medic is able to just reattach a temporary blood supply and allow them to drag themselves back to the medical bay so they can basically be sewn back together. This Project Avatar is absolutely horrifying and absolutely delightful. It feels like something straight out of 40K. And I don't want to prattle on too much about it because I think it's probably the best part of the book. And I don't want to ruin the book for anybody who wants to read it. So I'm going to touch lightly on some of the things I didn't like. And unfortunately, in this, it's one of the things I normally like about a lot of books, and it's the characters because they don't feel deep enough. They don't feel different enough. And it might just be because of the type of book that this is to portray the grim darkness of war, the necessities we must go through. When I have to worry about how the characters feel about each other and their romantic entanglements and what's going on, it feels like any human in a Godzilla movie. I honestly don't care. I'm here to see the grim awfulness of war. I don't care if you guys are hooking up or what you have to do to make your lives a little better. And technically, this is going to bring up another thing that I didn't much care for, and that was the little army prom that they had going on. And so, right before they're about to be deployed, the sergeant in charge of them feels kind of bad, so he arranges for them to have a little bit of R&R and gets them a DJ and some booze and some food, and kind of just lets them go about their thing. But it's mixed men and women, and they're not supposed to fornicate. But you have a bunch of people locked in an underground environment where they've been doing nothing but working very hard, and most of them are in very good shape. You're going to get some fornication because you have people in forced close proximity. It's going to happen. And a lot of this was to avoid attachments, but they're going to develop attachments because you've got them fighting side by side. So it felt kind of off and kind of counterproductive. So it was something that didn't feel fitting to the story. I would have liked a little bit more darkness to what they were going through. Now, I can understand the importance of juxtaposition. You want to have a little bit of normality, a little bit of happiness, because if it's all grim, dark, and awful, it becomes the new normal, and there's nothing grim, dark, and awful about it. But the little personal touches, their worries, trying to atone for their past crimes, these are nice little side notes, but they don't need to be as big of a feature in this as it turned out to be. But again, these are kind of petty compared to the awfulness of the grim, dark things going on around them. Just the fact that they're losing this war and every planet is basically just an evac mission. If we'd have had more focus on that, I think it would have been better. And that's going to bring me into my thoughts. And I am reading off some notes here. So I really think this book should have just focused on the war aspect of the horrible things that they're having to do to win this war and the questionable morality and ethics that are going into it. I think that would have made it a far more interesting story. The characters themselves are a little underwhelming to be featured as much as they are, or at least to feature their love story and personal struggles as much as they do, especially anything that doesn't relate to the war that they're fighting. It just doesn't feel like it needs to be part of the book. like I really wanted the ethical choices because there's one part in the book where we're going through what is basically a board meeting where the army executives are like, look at this amazing thing we've done and think of the psychological impact it's going to have on our enemies. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, this is absolutely going to horrify them. Good job. But the other people around them are like, no, this is terrible. This is awful. And it leads me to think that maybe I'm a little bit dead inside because I'm looking at this like, oh my gosh, can you imagine the shock value? How horrifying would this be to go up against? You put someone down, and 5 minutes later, they're coming after you. Is absolute. It should have been more horrifying than it was. And there should have been some people up in the top who were actually kind of monstrous about it, who were actually more along the lines of, this is great. We're scaring an enemy that's been basically kicking us around for a long time. If we can't win on the weapons front, maybe we can just literally scare them away and think of how much of a monster we are. But that's not really addressed. And I really feel like this book could have benefited from someone who's terrible. Honest to God, terrible. I don't think enough was played into that, but it's not so much that it'll stop you from enjoying the story. The monstrous grim darkness of this book is enough to carry it through. Even if at some parts it kind of drags, most of the parts that it drags are basically just the character development parts, the parts where we're trying to learn about the individuals and who they are and why they're there. It's honestly not something I can really care about. They're part of a penal legion. They've basically been augmented to the point they can never disobey the army again. So there's really no point in worrying about it. I would like it's more like sprinkles on a Sunday. It should be a minor thing. We do want to know that they have other hopes and aspirations, but the amount that's focused on in this book is probably a bit much. And actually, I think that's about all I have to say about this book, at least without giving too much more away. I do apologize. I wanted to make this a more proper review. I wanted to set this up with an actual script because I'm trying to work on my writing a little bit more in detail. And so I want to script a few more of my things to come. But I've got a few other things that I'm hoping to work on in the future. And I hope you all will join me for that. Thank you, Rainer, and whoever else joined me on this. And I'm going to end it there so I can get a few more things done with my day. Thanks for joining me, and I wish you good luck.